Hey everyone, how's it going? Kermode here, back with another tutorial. In this video, I'm going to give you guys 5 ways you can actually make your sounds wider. Before we get into the video, I do want to mention I've got a remix contest going on right now for the opportunity to win over $2,000 in prizes amongst the top 3 winners. If you want to enter the contest, I'm going to drop a link for it in the description below. But without further ado, let's dive right into it. So I've got a vocal here and I've made it completely mono.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
And first, and one of the most common techniques people know about is something known as the Haas Effect. The Haas Effect is a technique where you create interaural time differences between your 2 ears to give the perception of width and space. So what I mean by that is our ears and our brain are really good at perceiving when a sound arrives in one ear quicker than the other one, which really allows us to locate something in space, perceive stereo, things like that. So with a sound, you can create something like that by delaying one ear later than the other. So how we're going to do that, and there's a few ways you can approach it, but how we're going to do that is we're going to use Ableton's delay. Now, it's important you have the filter section off because we don't want to be affecting the sound. And it's important you have feedback down too because we don't want the sound to continuously delay. If there's any sort of dry signal mixed in with the wet, this can also lead to, phasing, which we don't really want. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to just work with the wet signal. So here's how we do it. What we want to do is we want to set this to time mode because we don't want to work with synchronized values. And we want to unlink the ears. So now we have control over the delay time in each ear. Now we're going to set 1 to 1 millisecond, which is going to act as our dry signal. If you're really anal about that one side coming 1 millisecond earlier, you can actually open up the delay section on a track and delay it backward a millisecond, so then it evens out and it's hitting at the original time. Now after that, we're going to delay one ear. Now my recommendation is anywhere between 12 to 25 milliseconds. That's when the Haas effect is really starting to occur. Any quicker and you're going to run into sort of phasing problems. Any later and you're going to start to get into kind of a flamming territory. So let's check it out. Let's see what sounds good with our vocal.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal. I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
See, it's almost hard for the brain to perceive unless you understand that there's 2 different timings going on. Obviously, we can hear it because we know, but to the average listener, they don't really understand that. Now, again, if we delay any further,
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
It's clear. And if it's any quicker,
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
we're kind of getting into weird phasing territory. So, 12 to 25 milliseconds, it isn't a law. Try it with every sound, see what works. But again, watch the feedback, watch the dry wet, and watch the filter. Next, very commonly and kind of an expansion on this is chorus. So what chorus is really doing is it's creating multiple versions of our sound, delaying when they arrive, as well as modulating the pitch. Because if you think of yourself and if you think of there were 5 different versions of you singing, there's no way each of you would be the exact same pitch, the exact same time. There would be slight discrepancies, and that's exactly what chorus does.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
Personally, I don't really like chorus because it can really mangle the phase of the sound.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
It's a little watery.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
And it's just kind of, I don't know. I don't really like it. Personally, I don't use it chorus very often, and I don't recommend it too often. But if you want that specific, synthetic chorus sound,
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
it is a good option for adding width into your sound. Now, the next technique is technically the best way to make something as wide as possible, but it's also probably the worst thing for your mix in terms of making something wide. Let me show you. So for something to be totally mono, what it means is both speakers are creating the exact same signal with no discrepancies. So to make something as wide as possible, if you phase invert one ear so it's doing the complete opposite phase, you will perceive it as absolutely wide. So to do that, what we do is we take utility and we phase flip one ear. And our sound couldn't be wider. You're going to run into a lot of problems though. The second this is summed to mono, your sound has disappeared because it's completely phase canceled. And that can happen coming out of the speakers too, where there's phase canceling going on in the air and your sound isn't as strong as it could be. So it's very dangerous, but it's technically the most efficient way to make something wide. And it's a cool way to add like hidden things in tracks that disappear when summed to mono. So for example, you could have your vocal totally wide, but then if someone listens to it in mono, let's say my phone here converted it to mono, your sound would totally disappear. And I've actually had a song like that before, not my own, where I've listened to a rap track, I love it, tried to show it to a friend when we were out, and the vocal was completely gone and I didn't understand. And it was because it was phase canceling in mono and totally gone. Again, be very, very careful with this one. Don't do it very often, but if you're really going for that type of sound, it's there and it's really psychedelic and weird. Totally sounds like your head's like flipping inside out because this never happens in nature. So this is really weird, really cool, effective, but dangerous. So be careful. Next up is using any sort of effect that allows you to offset the effect between the ears. There's tons of these in Ableton. First and foremost, the most obvious one is auto pan. What auto pan really is doing is it's just changing the volume between the ears.
I'm not finding your signal.
So that's kind of the most obvious demonstration of the concept, but there's a lot more that do something like this. Auto filters one, where if you offset the phase and you turn up the amount,
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal. I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
The filter is changing between the ears, but there's a lot more options with this. Phaser and flanger are kind of the most obvious next options, where those will have phase differences.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
Which is what gives it that sound of swirling around your head. But you can also do this yourself. So what you want to do is you want to split the signal into a left and right signal, which is quite easy. You take the left and you pan it to the left. You group it. You take the right, you pan it to the right. And now if you process these slightly differently, what you'll actually get is a stereo sound. So let's distort the right ear different than the left ear.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal. I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
And that difference between the ears is what we perceive as width. So you can get really creative with this. Really, any sort of differences in the left and right ear will start to make that stereo. And lastly, kind of in the same realm as the Haas effect, but a little bit of a different effect, is having really short room reverbs. So most of the time, reverbs kind of wash out your mix and they cover up and they blanket the whole mix. But if you have really short, small reverbs, those small, tiny reverbs will give the perception of width. So let's actually try this with a large wet value so we can hear the whole thing. And we want the decay time to be very, very short.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal. I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal. I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
Now that we've kind of set this up,
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
The way we want, let's group it and watch what happens when I blend it with the dry.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal. I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
So this one's really nice because you get a really nice blend of the dry and the wet signal.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
So this is just a quick and easy one. It adds space, and again, you can keep the dry signal, which is really clean, and they don't really interfere with each other too much, which I quite like. Now, lastly, one little bonus thing is I just want to talk about utility. A lot of people think that using the utility width knob adds width into your sound when you set it to 400.
I'm reaching out, I'm not
That's wrong. What utility width is doing is it's setting the volume and the balance between the mono and the stereo signal. So if our sound is mono before this, and we're in mid-side mode and we go all the way to the side, you're not going to hear anything, because what we've done is we've isolated the side. We haven't turned it up, we've isolated it, but because there's no stereo information, nothing comes out. If we drag it to the left towards mid, nothing's going to happen because we're only listening to stereo.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
But where this is really powerful is when you do have stereo information in the sound, you can turn it up. Sometimes I find this the most efficient way because adding a new stereo effect to something that already has stereo information in it is just adding a whole whack of problems, where instead you could just turn it up. What do I mean by that? Well, let's delete all these utilities. Let's listen to the original sample. The original sample actually has some stereo information in it.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
Now, if we take utility and we drag it to the right when we're in its regular mode, not mid-side mode, we're turning up the sides. So check this out.
I'm reaching out, I'm not finding your signal.
So we did technically make this sound wider, but we did it by just turning up the stereo information that was already there. We didn't create a new stereo effect. This was already baked into the sample and we turned it up. So this is a really good way to balance the mid information and stereo information of a sound. And I find it the most efficient way to deal with that in the mix, because you're kind of taking the source information, turning it up or turning it down. You're not adding new stereo effects, because when your mix has a ton of stereo effects, choruses, Haas effects, unisons, all these things, it starts to sound a little washed out, a little thin, a little unclear. So I find this a really efficient way to deal with that. So there we go, guys. That's 5 ways you can add width to your mix. If you like this video, consider subscribing, sharing it with a friend. It helps a lot. And once again, I do want to mention I've got a remix contest going on for my track Chameleon. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link to it in the description of the video. So thanks again, guys. My name's Kermode. Peace.